Abseiling is the form that you use for descending rock faces using ropes and mechanical devices. It's generally associated with rock climbing. It's used in caving and police rescue and other rescue formations. This isn't a club, this is a Scout association, and that's where I originally was taught how to abseil, amongst other activities. It has its own training section, which we classify as a high-risk section. It's a high-risk activity, so you've got to be qualified before you can actually teach somebody else how to abseil. It's always advisable to learn by someone who is experienced, so that you don't do anything that you shouldn't. I only know of 1 or 2 accidents that have occurred, and that's only because safety hasn't been the priority. If you're careful with your knots, if you make sure that everything that you put in, as far as points where you tie the rope off and so on, that everything has been double checked by somebody else who also knows what's going on, then it is a safe sport. Using the right materials, the right ropes, the right devices, then it is as safe as driving a car. Should people go out and just grab a rope and drive every day? I'd say no. There's no way that anyone should go out and abseil and drive. I would not recommend for anybody to go out and to pick up their little pieces of rope and rush off and go abseiling. It is dangerous if it is not handled with the proper care that it requires. If anybody is interested in learning how to abseil, there is only one method to do it, and that is to contact any of the clubs that have it, to contact the Scout Association at their headquarters in Hunter Street, and see what other activities are involved and just when training is available to people who want to learn how to abseil.
totally different to our racing here. A lot faster, smaller circuits, bigger fields, 130 riders in each field, where we're used to riding in 30, 40 or 50 riders over here.
Which part of the world did you actually visit?
I was in Holland for 2 months and I raced in Germany as well.
You're home a bit early?
Yes. I was getting a bit sick of riding around in circles all the time, and I wanted to ride our big race here because it's our biggest race of the season for the local boys.
It's as flat as a tack over there. You're going to take on the hills, of course, up round Seaham and those places.
That's right, yes. I think I'm fit enough to do it. I've been out over the hills around Dungog and Gresford this week, and I'm handling them okay out training. The Saturday and Sunday will tell how I handle them in a race.
What sort of a field is likely for this event?
It's very good. There's 3 former Olympians, Kevin Nichols, the dual gold medalist at the Commonwealth Games, 2 of the top Queenslanders, so it's very good. We've got all the top New South Wales boys, of course, too.
Litvinov was competing in front of his home crowd in the 8th tournament of the Soviet nations. And this is his winning style. Despite the magnificent wind-up to this throw, it was his second attempt that broke the world record. An unprecedented 84.14 metres. Several other world records were also broken in the 6-day tournament, including a new heptathlon record by East German athlete Ramona Neubert.
Today's meeting is seen as a major initiative by coal-related councils addressing their common problems. 16 local government areas in New South Wales are taking part in the combined approach to funding. Member councils who attended today's conference in Newcastle believe they are bearing a high level of the social costs of coal development in relation to the benefits they receive. In 1981-82 financial year, state and federal governments collected more than $600 million in coal-related revenue, compared to the $30 million that went to local governments. In a bid to put forward the strongest possible case for more funding, the councils are lodging a joint submission which calls for the establishment of a development fund to administer money to local councils.
Well, we're asking for a fund to be set up where we get more of the monies that do go to the state and federal governments. We're not saying that the mines should pay more, because we think that they're paying enough as it is, and they're having their problems, of course, as you know. But we're saying that we should get a better share, and it should be split up more to local government, because we're currently bearing the cost of all these problems.
Delegates today voted to send a delegation of 6 representatives to Sydney to present the submission to state and federal government ministers. The trophy for being the most successful exhibitor in the show was taken out by Wyndham Estate at last night's presentation held at Rothbury Estate. The company also holds 5 other major trophies for individual wines. Wyndham Estate dominated all of the classes in the wine show, and the company is confident its success will help push Hunter Valley wines overseas. Winemaker Brian McGuigan believes success was mainly due to Mother Nature.
No, I think that the 1983 season has been an exceptional one for us. The weather up to vintage was exceptionally good. We had very dry conditions, and as a result we got a lot of juice and we got a lot of sugar in our juice, and therefore that meant that we have a lot of flavour in our wine, and of course after all it's flavour that the judges are after.
And this is very important for you as a wine grower exporting overseas.
Well, of course, it's very important when you are trying to sell to wholesalers internationally that they see that your credentials are well established in your home market, and therefore they believe that that could be a good inroad for them into their own market.
Thank you.
The official launching took the form of a concert which included performances by local Salvation Army bands and the NBN Children's Choir. The 1,600 people that attended the concert were told of the massive costs involved in operating the Salvation Army. Australia-wide, $40 million is needed each year, and in the Hunter Valley alone, $1 million a year is needed. According to a spokesman for the Salvation Army, demands on the group's services in the Hunter are increasing because of the way the region has been affected by the recession. The Salvation Army holds a Red Shield appeal each year in an effort to boost its modest state and federal grants. In launching the door knock appeal today, Mr Ian Turpie asked the people of the Hunter not to take the salvos for granted.
As I just found out, there will be 2,500 people giving their services and their time free on Sunday to raise money, and the salvos need a lot of money. I mean, they're looking after elderly men, alcoholics, I mean, you name it, and the salvos have got a hand in it. And it costs an enormous amount of money to run this each year, and I'm not sure what the target is, but obviously the more we can get, the better the services they'll provide. And when 2,500 people give up their time, I think it's a worthy appeal.
The state investigation into Hunter wineries was launched last year, following a question in Parliament by Liberal MP Mr Peter Collins. According to today's Telegraph, the report resulting from that investigation is scathing in its criticism of the wineries. The newspaper claims that it slams winemakers for using sultana grapes, which it says are banned in winemaking by the Health Department. Quoting an unnamed source, the Telegraph report also claims that Hunter winemakers are guilty of deceptive and misleading labelling. The article has brought an angry response from the president of the Hunter Valley Vineyards Association, Mr J Tulloch.
The allegations made in there about the use of inferior grapes just don't hold any truth whatsoever. The sultanas that they mention, firstly I'd like to point out that sultanas aren't commercially grown in the Hunter Valley. And as such I don't see how we could be using them, and the second point is that they say that sultanas are prohibited for being used. Well, that's the first I've heard of it, and I'm sure the first the industry's heard of it, because it's widely accepted fact that sultanas are used. There's a lot of them grown on the Murray River area and in Victoria and South Australia, and in the irrigated areas of New South Wales. There's quite a lot crushed each year for wine, so I don't see where they get that information from at all.
Why do you think the Health Department has conducted this investigation into the Hunter Valley area?
Well, there's some allegations made earlier in Parliament, and that has prompted the investigation, not only in New South Wales or Hunter producers, but throughout Australia. Now, what is in this report that is being given to the government, I have no idea, so I can't really confirm or deny any of the allegations that they may be making. But just to try and point the finger at the Hunter, I think is totally incorrect.
Minister arrived at the CAE a few minutes earlier than expected at 2:20, with her press secretary and the federal member for Newcastle, Mr Alan Morris. But despite the early start, her schedule was tight. After being introduced to college executives, she was whisked off on a tour of the campus. It was really only a cook's tour, rushed and not very thorough, although the Minister did, where possible, take the time to stop and chat casually with both staff and students. Senator Ryan's 1.25 hour stay at the CAE didn't allow for any more than a brief exchange with executives. However, she was presented with a written submission from the college calling for what it described as a more realistic level of funding. At Newcastle University, the story was the same. The Minister's time did not allow for a thorough look around. She did, however, have a little more time to talk with staff, particularly at the medical faculty, where the bulk of her time was spent. The Minister was not prepared to talk about rationalisation or the funding levels of the two institutions today, except to say she was sure both were aware of the government's budgetary constraints. She did, however, dispel rumours that in 1985 the government would go back on its decision not to force the two to amalgamate.
I've made the government's position clear and also have made it clear that the future development will be a matter of ongoing discussion here in Newcastle, as it would be in any part of Australia, because the government is interested in planned educational developments, and that requires ongoing discussion for all parties concerned.
The afternoon symposium held at the City Hall was called Planning Newcastle, the past 15 years and the next. In his keynote address, Mr James reflected on his early days as an up-and-coming town planner in Sydney and how Newcastle was hard to come to terms with when he arrived in 1970 to set up the city's first planning department. Colleagues believe Mr James was instrumental in making Newcastle aware of the importance of design. Mr James instigated the Civic Design Awards. Other planning procedures introduced by him will be followed through long after his retirement. His mark has been left on many projects, including Newcastle's East End. Redevelopment of the inner city area is of prime importance to the city's first town planner. In his speech, Mr James was critical of the Council's approach to this matter.
Regretfully, our elected representatives have not fully grasped the economic implications of loss of population to the city and the value of the population maintenance strategies. Until they do, and this is translated to the community at large as an urgent problem to be resolved, there seems little hope of overcoming the declining population in the foreseeable future.
Mr James retires from the Newcastle City Council next week.
This extremely important issue is dealt with at some length.
The first Hunter Valley Research Foundation art show was held at the Cooks Hill Galleries in 1981. It was so successful that the foundation and the gallery director, Mr Mark Widdop, agreed to make it a biennial event. The latest show is titled A Prime Collection, and it certainly lives up to its name. The list of contributors reads like a who's who of contemporary Australian art. Each of the 20 participating artists is noteworthy, including the 5 local ones. It is possible, however, to single out the 3 pieces by David Hockney as those likely to attract the most attention. Hockney's work is world-renowned, and he's been hailed as the new Picasso. Overall, the exhibition covers a broad range of styles and techniques, capturing a variety of moods. It's a show that will undoubtedly be wide in its appeal. For prospective buyers, it caters for all tastes, while at the same time enabling more casual observers to keep up with the latest directions in Australian art.